Welcome to the Queer Witch Project, your resource for all things queer and witchy. I'm Damona Peacock, your fabulous, non-binary, neurospicy, ordained queerdo with a fascination for all things symbolism, cycles, and patterns.
And I am Moon Kitty, your queer femme poly kitchen witch, and I am a proud geek. Today's topic is queer tarot. Damona, what is queer about tarot?
Well, Moon Kitty, what's not queer about tarot?
Good question. Well, let's start at the beginning because tarot is very encompassing, right? It's been around. Usually, tarot is a form of cartomancy, which is divination with cards. And tarot itself has had many different aspects and ways of doing it for centuries now, really, truly. But what we think of as the modern tarot is the Rider-Waite. So the Tarot de Marseille, the Thoth, Lenormand, all these are other types of tarot cartomancy types, which we're not going to kind of get into. We're kind of dealing with the RW. And you'll sometimes hear it as RWS, which we'll talk about in a minute. But initially it was published as the Rider-Waite Tarot Deck. Now, starting out with why this is problematic to start with, A.E. White is the author, who is a white man. Shocker, right? But Rider isn't the illustrator. Rider is the publisher. The actual Rider-Waite is the publisher and the author. It gives no credit to the illustrator, Pamela Smith, which is why a lot of modern day practitioners will say Rider-Waite Smith, to kind of give her that little bit of recognition because she never got paid anything. She got a flat rate, but she didn't receive any royalties or anything else on any of her artwork until from at all. She never received
And yet to
credit for
think
sales.
that there are so many decks that are based off of her
Initial artwork, yeah. But aside from that, let's get into some of the history behind this. So A.E. White was a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn, which was a mystical alchemical practice in, I want to say, the 30s. And there were some very sketchy things about the Golden Dawn. We're not going to get into deeply. To give them credit, they were one of the first organizations that did allow women in there, which shocker, shocker. But still, it was very much rooted in misogyny. It was very much rooted in, you know your place, you will do what we say kind of thing. So there's a little bit of sketchiness there.
Also, wasn't there a lot of like Christian mysticism?
Yes, exactly. And that's what's kind of go into. So as A.E. White was doing this, as he's creating these ideas of what he wanted to create for this divination deck, he had this idea of what he wanted, and these ideas are based on Egyptian descriptions of the major arcana that was found in earlier decks, like the Tarot de Marseille, in the earlier Egyptian cartomancy decks. So he's already borrowing from other cultures to create this. And then he's throwing in a heavy heaping dosage of Christian mysticism and symbolism. And he's using the Golden Dawn astrological attributions as well. So this A.E. White, his whole author as this is all based on Egyptian descriptions of another deck, Christian symbolism, and Golden Dawn astrological signs. It also has heavily binary gender aspects to it. So, and traditional gender stereotypes, which you all know, male, female, you are this, you are that, you are a father, you are a mother, you are this. So it's very, very binary in that male, female role. And to be honest, a lot of his meanings as he was pulling things out for the various cards, he actually heavily relied on the work of someone else. Jean-Baptiste Alliette, who was a French occultist in the 1700s. So he's appropriating. We talk a lot about appropriation. This is a heavily appropriated deck. And then when you do get to Pamela Smith, like I said, she gave her a flat fee to illustrate the cards, but she never received credit until much later. And she never, again, received any royalties or any money from the deck itself or any of the alternate printings or second and third printings later. Now, Pamela Smith was born in London, and she did spend part of her childhood in Jamaica. But this is where her, as an aspect of an illustrator, also gets a little bit sketch, because when she came back from Jamaica, she had a studio where she liked to entertain her artistic and literary friends by dressing in Jamaican costume and adopting a Jamaican accent and telling Jamaican folk tales. And so we've got a white woman appropriating Jamaican culture and history to talk about these folk tales. And then her illustrations, many of them were lifted directly from images of earlier decks, again, kind of reformatting, and also from the Solabusca deck in the British Museum. So she was taking a lot of things directly from other decks as the basis of her illustration. So they weren't necessarily hers, they were copying. Now, we all say imitation is the best form of flattery, and things can be adapted and adopted into something else. But what it all does is it's a whole lot of appropriation at the core of the Rider-Waite-Smith. And all of it really makes me want to acknowledge and deconstruct those really problematic circumstances around those very specific imagery of those cards, and find decks that redefine it and refine it into something different. So, like, take those meanings, strip them of that religious ideology, strip them of gender, imagery, sexual orientation stereotypes, and all those things, and kind of present them in a modernized way that can give useful guidance, because the guidance ideas behind it of what this deck means reflects actual real experiences, but without the religious bullshit behind it. Pardon my French there. Let's strip away the bad, and let's put them into something good.
For me, tarot is kind of like a living language, but
Mm-hmm.
it's one aspect of symbolic language of that is a living language and is constantly evolving and open for interpretation by what things mean to the individual that's receiving the symbol.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think about the journey of the tarot being like the human journey, and a lot of its wisdom living in that collective unconscious, and of like that kind of place where the mind is trying to figure out how the mind works,
Right.
or how the mind is trying to communicate with the spirit
Mm-hmm.
of the body and the spirit of everything else. So without wanting to throw the baby out with the bathwater, am I using the
Fair.
correct metaphor? I do feel like, well, you asked what's queer about the tarot. I kind of feel like there is queerness in the tarot because it is about the human journey, and humans of all kinds of humans connect to it for different reasons, including humans who identify as queer or trans,
Mm-hmm.
gay. There are queer humans that feel connected to the patterns of the human journey. And there are a lot of creators who have appropriated, let's say, the wisdom out of the RWS, and also influenced by maybe any of these other modalities of tarot or tarot like divination tools or systems. And people have then taken what they get best out of that, but re-envisioned it in a more inclusive way.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it could be argued that was just another series of appropriation, but I really do love how, when I was a baby witch starting out buying my very first tarot deck, there was a lot smaller selection
Mm-hmm.
of options, and a
Yes,
lot more
very
of
much.
them were so often either RWS inspired or based off of the RWS. And now there is like deck after deck after deck, creator after creator after creator, Kickstarter after Kickstarter after Kickstarter, of people envisioning the wisdom that is in this collective unconsciousness, trying to understand the human journey and maybe get some insight through happenstance of how a card falls out of a deck.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that speaks more to the whole encompassed human experience, and less from the lens or the viewpoint of the old white men with their
Yes,
stuff.
tendencies.
Yes, biases and all bigotry.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for me personally, um, disengaging with some of the Christian iconography of tarot has been very important. Like
Mm-hmm.
the Hierophant card likes to haunt me. It's really rude. I don't like it. And that could be part of being, having the 11 life path and, being an ordained, life celebrant that, does spirit work in this world. And sure, the Hierophant likes to come up for me, but the traditional RWS iconography of the Christian mysticism of the Pope being like the doorway to, that kind of life was not the message that just resonates with me. That's not my experience of spirituality. But I've seen a lot of decks re-envision that card as like roots to the tree, or to a connection to your ancestors and their traditions and their, what's the best that you get out of, any kind of traditions, and not so much about the oppressive cultural traditions that I don't subscribe to.
Over my right shoulder is a Hierophant poster that has actually been re-envisioned from one of the decks I'm going to talk about. And it's become very witchy. It's become very connected to that idea. Instead of being the Pope, it is that spiritual advisor. And I think that redefining, is what's really important as we're looking at things. The archetypes are there, and archetypes aren't inherently masculine or feminine. And as queer people, we tend to embody both masculine and feminine characteristics at any given time. Again, everything's on a spectrum for where we are at any given point on that spectrum. And being able to redefine some of these cards, I think, is really, really important. Speaking on that aspect, I know we both brought in some different cards that we wanted to share and talk about. So you mentioned Kickstarters, and we all know that I am a Kickstarter aficionado, addict, other words that I will not use that generally refer to someone who is addicted and will pay lots of money for things. So I love Kickstarters. I love supporting individual artists, and a lot of different decks are very much queer decks, and I love supporting those. But we have some decks here that we wanted to talk about specifically that are either by queer artists or are queer allies that we can determine or have a queer vibe to them in any way, shape, or form. Because as we have mentioned, there are so many different decks out there, and we want to make sure that you guys have access to some of the different decks that are there.
What is your favorite queer created, queer artist tarot deck that you use?
Oh, I can't have a favorite. I don't. I have too many to have a favorite. But no, what I find for me, and again, your mileage may vary. Everyone's a little bit different, but for me, different decks speak to different circumstances and how they have a tone and a voice. And some decks are really good for queer advice, and some decks are no nonsense, no bullshit, we're going to tell you what it is kind of deck. And others are a little bit more focused on softness and all of that. So I don't have a favorite queer deck per se, but I have a lot of decks that I use that are by queer authors. So I wanted to share some of my favorites. Yeah, with an S on the end of that, of different queer decks that I have. And I happen to have, and we'll plug this a little bit later, but I have a YouTube channel where I also do unboxings for different decks. So you will hopefully see some of that a little bit later too.
Yeah, I know. Asking you what your favorite is a loaded question, because you literally have a library to choose from.
I do. I'm staring over there looking at like two cubbies full of just decks stacked front to back of different things. So it's okay. We all have our addictions. We all have our hobbies. Collecting decks is one of mine. But getting back to what we're doing, so we can keep going on to show you some of these amazing decks. The first deck that I know that I wanted to talk about is the Numinous Tarot. And ultimately, the reason I want to bring this one up first is this is the deck that truly got me into realizing there were queer artists that are doing this. We have a mutual friend of ours who had the first printing of this particular deck. I saw it and fell in love with it, and I ended up getting the second printing.
I fell in love with it as well.
It is. It's just this gorgeous deck. It's called the Numinous Tarot, and it's published initially under the name Noel Arthur Heimpel, but they have recently changed their name to Cedar Wren MacLeod. So any later publications will have the Cedar Wren MacLeod. They are a queer disabled artist and author. They identify as autistic, agender, asexual, and gray aromantic. Now, the deck itself, and for those of you who are on the YouTube, you can see this. I'm holding up some of the colors. You can see they're very, very bright on here. It's bright, it's colorful, it's completely genderless in its specificity. There are no specific genders to this at all. It does loosely follow the RWS, like we talked about, a lot of modern decks do. But instead of having that kind of defined binaries, your kings become mystics, your queens are creators, and your other gendered major arcana, like the high priestess, is a diviner. So everything is changed to a genderless format that can be easily accessible by male, female, and everyone in between. The guidance that it gives is supportive. It really is supportive and nurturing, and it's on that gentler side, even with challenging cards, because we all know there are some cards that are incredibly challenging to deal with when they come up in readings. For you, Demona, you said the Hierophant haunts you. For a long period of time, the Three of Swords haunted me. And that is my least favorite deck. I can deal with a Tower card with no problems. With a Three of Swords, that darn misery, heartbreak, treachery, feeling just overwhelmed. That one just, I hate it every single time.
Because you know that feeling all
I
too well.
do. I
Aw.
do. So, but those kinds of things that we talk about, I really like that even in those hard cards, it still gives gentle guidance. So when I am feeling just overwhelmed, I know I have a safe space to go to in this deck, and it can just give really, really pretty, really neat advice. The suits of this deck are elemental based. So instead of your pentacles, coins, etc., wands, swords, we have bells, vials, candles, and tomes.
Oh, yeah,
So
that's
still earth, air, fire, water, but it is a different kind of aspect to the bell being air, the vial being that water container, candles, fire, obviously, and then tomes, that book, that earthy knowledge that comes with all of it. So I love the way that it redefines those suit cards as well.
I love it. I love it. And I always love the characters. There are definitely some very non-binary identifying looking, visually androgynous type characters in a lot of those cards. And I love seeing that kind of diversity.
Mm-hmm. It is beautiful. It is really beautiful.
So that deck reminds me a lot of one of my decks that I just queer created from a queer author, absolutely love, and I couldn't find it to bring it today to talk about, but I'm still going to talk about it.
Good.
And of course, my sassy friend over here says it's called the Under the Bed Tarot. So they're like, well, maybe it's hiding under the bed, and I'm all like, you're fired. That really happened. So but I obviously they have a website. Found this one on Kickstarter too. Some of me and the best decks where they have relationships with started on Kickstarter, because there is this whole special aspect about knowing or being in on the process and getting to connect with the creator and getting to know who they are and knowing the lens that they're using.
Right.
So the description on the website for Under the Bed Tarot is it's a deck for queers, weirdos, and people who feel too much. Well, if that's not a deck for me, I don't know what is. And it's, it's black and white, and it's gonna blur out, but obviously we're gonna share on links and stuff, but it's black and white. And every little character in archetype in the tarot is a little monster that you would find under your bed.
Aww.
And even though it's got like this kind of shadow aspect of it being like an under the bed deck, it's very gender neutral, and it's so sweet. Like even the Tower card, I believe the booklet says something like, the tarot's never going to hand you anything that you can't handle. Life isn't ever going to hand you anything you can't handle. The tarot's just trying to help you be aware of it. But, don't be scared of this. It's just so that you're aware and you can walk in, but you can handle this. And it's like so sweet about how even some of those cards that people traditionally kind of like to avoid is interpreted so very sweetly. Here's more about the author. So his name is Lark Malachi Gray. I am a tarot reader and the co-host of podcasts, The Gaily Prophet, The Gay Pirate Podcast, and Escape from Reality.
Oh, I love it.
Right. And I'm also queer, trans, disabled, chronically ill, a Pisces, Scorpio rising and moon, a Gryffindor, and an INFJ. And I've been reading tarot professionally since 2015 and unprofessionally since 2018, since 2008. Sorry. So obviously has a long relationship with tarot
Hmm.
himself. And I love that we kind of got like updates from him, and we saw like on his Instagram, you can see how some of his doodles got turned into a tarot archetype.
Cute.
And the monsters are just the little under the bed monsters are just so cute, and they feel like little messengers. They feel like little
Hmm.
messengers. And even the court cards are like the explorer or the enactor, or I know there's a couple others, but you know, they've removed the idea of gendered
Hmm.
hierarchies, and just kind of talked more about what the essence of the card is. Like, you know, the explorer would be so much of like that youthful energy that you would get in the younger court
Hmm.
cards. So anyway, it's a brilliant deck. I highly recommend it. It's super sweet, but it's not afraid to go a little dark, and it's definitely like 100% queer art author. And you know, I do think they do extra runs on Kickstarter from time to time,
Hmm.
or it's available on their website, so definitely
Right.
look into that.
And that's the other thing with all of these that we're talking about that may have started as Kickstarter decks. The reason they're here is they're still accessible, whether they're through Etsy or they're through the author's website, as they are, because oftentimes they do Kickstarter runs, they will have extras. They'll print extras so they can then turn around and sell at the end. So these decks should all still be available, at least at the time of recording. These should all still be available. I can't speak to 10 years from the future,
Or
but
whenever people are listening to this.
right, exactly. So there will be links in the show notes, and down below in the YouTube description, so you can see where we found these decks and where you can access them if you have any interest in them. We've talked about the gentle decks. Now the next one I wanted to bring up is chaos. It is pure chaos incarnate. And for those of you who may have heard of it, this is the Alleyman's Tarot. Now, this Alleyman's Tarot was the most funded and backed tarot Kickstarter ever. It raised something like $1.5 million. It was insane. Like 19,000, 20,000 decks were backers had done this. It had blown away everything else. Now, it's published by Seven Dane Asmund, who is a queer author, publisher, artist, and game designer. Their bio states they live in a constant state of gender sliding, which I think is the best description of gender fluidity and transness ever. I don't know what I am today. My gender is sliding. I love that so much. With this deck, I'm going to hold it up here. This deck, as you can see, is enormous. It is 194 cards. If you include all of the booster packs and all of the additionals that were onto it. So your average tarot deck, for those of you who aren't sure, is around 72 to 78 cards. This is 194. This is almost triple that. It is literally 3 inches tall when you are stacking it up. And what makes this deck unique is there's an entire mythos and story around the Alleyman and that idea of that shadow person in the unseen spaces, those liminal spaces, or the side of an alley, or that trickster that kind of gives you advice that you see and then disappears, but it changes and revolutionizes your life a little bit. So there's that kind of mythos behind it, which plays into it, but doesn't necessarily detract from what the deck is. But the deck itself is this idea of a mismatched card deck. And these are gaining popularity based on this particular deck. You'll see more and more of those happening right now. But it's different cards. And for example, this has like 9 or 10 different death cards and like 5 or 6 different lovers cards. And each one has a different interpretation because death can be seen and done in many different ways. So each one has slightly different. So, like, for example, here's a death card that's like the death motel.
Ah, that's clever.
And it's like, stay for a good time, not a long time, right? And how are you going to deal with that aspect of death in kind of a fun sense, in kind of a long sense, that kind of transitional? There's also cards that are completely different that have nothing in the RWS aspect, like the Hole. That's nothing that's related to RWS at any way, shape, or form. But it's that
I've met
idea
people
of
like that though.
exactly that black hole, that event horizon, what happens when you're dealing with that kind of personality. And then my other favorite is the Queen of Bombs.
Oh wow.
So
Ooh, so
taking that
colorful.
idea of the nuclear housewife and exploding it. What are your expectations? What are you thinking of when you think of that 1950s nuclear housewife, June Cleaver in her heels and pearls? And how do you take and explode that idea into what is modern and everything else? So this deck is just crazy. And as you can go through, you can see that I've taken and I've done my own little numbering system on the bottom where I literally wrote in Sharpie all of the numbers that come with it because it's all done in a spiral bound notebook. So it comes with the idea of spiral bound notebooks that breaks it all down, but there's no order to this. Like I said, it's chaos. So you can't start with, oh, well, here's your major arcana 1 through 22. Here's your court cards. And no, it's all over the place. And that's what makes it kind of interesting and fun. So when you are reading, when you want that energy, that blunt kick in the chest kind of energy for when you are dealing with a lot of chaotic elements or need to make sense sometimes of chaotic elements, this deck really does help with that. And it's that great shadow deck for kind of peering into those liminal places, those things where we're not sure where you're going to go, but getting that guidance out. And I know that this author just finished another series of decks as well. The Kickstarter just finished running again at the time of this recording, where there are 3 new aspects of other decks. There's a Alleyway Tarot, which is completely different cards than this one,
Mhm.
Oracle of Play, and an Oracle of Shadows. So those will also be coming soon at some point.
Isn't the idea that this whole deck is built off of cards that he's collected
Mm-hmm.
over the, many journeys that he's been on? And then
Exactly.
in reality, the creator had submissions from
Mm-hmm.
all over. I mean,
Yeah.
that's taking the idea that we are empowered to reinterpret the tarot however we want and putting it on steroids of
Yes.
like getting everybody to have some kind of input into one little, not so little
Yeah.
deck
Not so little deck, but no, that's a good
of
point. That
chaos.
was the other thing that was like this is again, all of the decks that are modern are used with the permission of the artist. And as part of the Kickstarter funds is they would get additional bonuses on top of what he initially paid them for the artwork initially, depending on the tier, would give additional artist bonuses. So the
Nice.
artists themselves always got additional funding, additional payment
Oh,
for the use of this in the course of the deck, which I thought was really cool.
wow. That'd be a lot to manage.
Yes, I can't I
Apparently
can't even
chaos, not
imagine.
afraid of chaos. Kind of along those lines, talking about like that kind of, it's
Hmm.
not so much, well, the playful energy. Okay,
Yes.
I wanted to talk about like decks that aren't necessarily intentionally queer or intentionally ungendered, may still kind of follow some of the traditional trappings of
Hmm.
the common. But I have brought the Trash Panda Tarot,
Okay,
aka
fun.
a raccoon deck, and it has, as expected, quite a raccoon personality. Well, I backed this one on Kickstarter. The creator is Jennifer Starling Dukehart, and the website is trashpandatarot.com, of course. And I kickstarted this one specifically because one of my favorite leather title holder queer friends of mine is obsessed with raccoons. And one of the first things like I bonded with her over is when I was in 5th grade, I had to do an animal report and it was on raccoons. Because it was, because I love raccoons too, because they are
Hmm.
trash pandas. So like this deck has obviously the trash panda mischievous spirit,
Hmm.
and it's associated with my queer friend who is full of the raccoon mischievous spirit. And I can't say for certain that the creator is queer in any sort of way, gay, bi, whatever, but I will say that it came with pride stickers that I put into the box, mostly so that I would know what the top and the bottom was. But
Hmm.
anyway, because where else are you going to put your stickers? But like,
Right.
look at the happy little queer.
I like it. It's so
And
cute.
there are some like happy rainbow cards, like the traditionally the 6 of Swords,
Hmm.
how it's always there's a boat and you're
Yes.
crossing. So the boat in the 6 of Swords is hard to stop making it blur. But anyway, I'll show these on. But it's a floaty that is a rainbow
Oh,
unicorn,
I had a rainbow unicorn floaty. It was so awesome.
right? And then of course you get like the storm in the background here
Hmm.
with the Wheel of Fortune. You have the thunderbolt storm clouds and you have a beautiful bright rainbow coming out of it. And the Wheel of Fortune itself is a pizza.
Ah, yes, I
So
love it.
it has that sassy vibe that I expect out of my queer community, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Absolutely.
And may not be and I don't like, I can't say definitively whether the creator is queer or not, but they're obviously some kind of ally. And
Hmm.
the deck itself is comes in the voice of my sassy friend.
Speaking of decks like that, the one that I wanted to go over next is the Tarot of the Lantern Path by Rudis to Buddhist. And same thing, she doesn't necessarily identify or post any information about her identity on her website, but the deck itself is very obviously a homage to lesbianism and feminism. Here's the Eight of Swords, for example. It's incredibly beautiful. It's got this very femme energy. The Two of Cups, you have a very
Oh,
very clear femme community.
femme for femme.
Femme for femme, very lesbian, very beautiful artwork. Again, just beautifully drawn, very soft, very soft. Even the cards themselves have like the satiny finish to them. And they're so soft and they're just luxurious. And it just has this kind of hyper, almost Victorian, but Victorian meets like kink in some ways. Feel to the cards themselves. Now, they do follow generally the RWS format, which again makes sense. But when you have the traditionally masculine cards like the kings and the knights, they're still represented by femme identifying persons in the cards themselves.
Oh,
So even though it says knight or king, it'll still have a female or femme identified presenting
yes,
individual.
yes, daddy.
And while this little book is the little white book that comes with it is fairly minimal, it still gives information and it focuses more on keywords. So this is more of a deck that is useful for your intuition. So it gives you a keyword that tells you about what it could be, and then rather than this long detailed meaning that sometimes happens with certain decks. But yeah, no, this the Rudis, the Tarot of the Lantern Path by Rudis to Buddhist. And like I said, we'll have links for all of that below.
All right. So, honorable mentions, right? I have a deck that it's not really about the creator for me. It's the Mary L. Tarot Landscapes of the Abyss by Marie White. Okay, so Mary L. Tarot, right? But this is not what I call this deck. This is a deck that I inherited from a friend of mine who passed away 7 or 8 years ago. I want to say 7 years ago. Right after he passed away, his beautiful husband offered to allow his magical community to inherit a lot of his magical tools.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that came into my possession through my friend Raven Moon, through his beautiful husband, and then passed on to me is this deck of cards, of tarot decks. And I think at the time it was fairly new. And I want to say it was one of the most recent ones that Raven Moon had used.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I really believe this is because when it came into my possession, all the cards in the box were facing down except for one card that was left facing up, and I still,
Hmm.
of course, remember what card that was.
Right.
And that's what I do.
Hmm.
I often will leave my last reading facing up so that when I come to this deck again, I will be reminded of what the message was the last time I used this deck. But see, this friend of mine, Raven Moon, he was a peacock spirit and he was a magical like leader in our community for real, in our spiritual community, and bright and vibrant and happy and just living his best life when I met him.
Mm-hmm.
Such a joyous, beautiful man, beautiful queer human, who really just heart full of love.
Mm-hmm.
And that that love, and again, that kind of sassiness is
Mm-hmm.
totally the way the deck itself reads. You can't convince me it's not Raven Moon speaking to us. In fact, when he was in the hospital right before he went home on hospice, and circumstances, F cancer, circumstances being what they were, he couldn't communicate with his
Mm-hmm.
voice. So he would write us messages on a whiteboard. And the one that he wrote me when we saw each other in the hospital was, "Call on me when I'm gone. I will have more hands to help."
Mm. It gives me shivers. It gives me so many shivers right now when you
And
say that.
I come to tears every time I talk about it because I love him so much. And I just love that mentality of just like, I'm going to check in on you and you can rely on like calling on my help, because
Mm-hmm.
whatever I can do on the other side for the people that I know and that I love. I mean, he is definitely considered amongst one of my ancestors, for
Mm-hmm.
my queer ancestors in my chosen family, 100%. But my friends, even the ones who weren't blessed to meet Raven Moon, will often ask me to pull a card from the Raven Moon deck for them because they need to be read for filth by a sassy gay man on the other side who's
Yes.
willing to have more hands to help. And it's just a beautiful reminder for me.
And having the honor of being able to meet Raven Moon at the very last stages of his life, at a point where I was just coming into mine, um, spiritually, magically, queerly, in many ways. It was just, it was an amazing experience to meet him. And the Raven Moon deck is just unreal. Now, like I said, sometimes it's convoluted. It's a really challenging deck if you try to look at it
The
from the aspect of the author, but
the deck
seeing the
itself is
imagery.
probably one I would not have chosen. Yeah, and like you said, like the so much of it is based on stuff that I wasn't familiar with.
Hmm.
Um, but because of it being coming through as the voice of Raven Moon, so many of the cards to me come across as queer. Can't tell me these kings aren't like, hot gay spirits.
Yes, those kings are kings.
I definitely get queer archetypes out of a lot of this artwork, even though that's not what it was necessarily created or intended for. I read it as queer in ways that maybe the author didn't intend, but guess what? The spirit who left it to me
Very much so.
imbibed it, imbued it. Yes.
Very, very much so. I also have a honorable mention. Well, it's not inherently queer. The author Trung Le Nguyen is a Vietnamese American cartoonist, artist, and writer. And the style of the deck, I think of it as older anime. So think original Sailor Moon, this kind of anime aspects to it. But it's what makes this deck queer is it comes with ideally multiple different types of lovers cards. So it's not just the masculine feminine. There's feminine, there's masculine, there's masculine feminine, there's multiple different lovers cards that come through with it. And each of them has that different combination of genders and identity, but also the energy of it just feels very welcoming, feels like community. In that, if you've ever walked into a queer space at Pride or at other queer events, you just kind of feel this overwhelming welcomeness. And this deck has that kind of energy. And I really love this deck. I tend to use this deck for love readings. I am not someone who loves doing love readings. I really don't. I get those are probably the most common because everyone wants to know what's happening in my love life, because we have these ingrained stereotypes and norm and perceptions about how we should be falling in love and dealing with this kind of relationship escalator. Another story, different tangent. I'm Polly, remember that. But yes, but this idea of the love deck, it does give that kind of gentle guidance that helps you really focus on the different types of love, whether that is self-love, whether that is platonic love, or whether that is love of different types of connections or energies. But it really does have that kind of love aspect that comes through. So I will often, when someone asks me if they to do a love reading or ask about how a relationship is going, we'll pull out the star spinner. Even though it's, again, not inherently queer, it's got very much queer energy, and it has those multiple lovers cards. So I think the idea was initially that you could take out and put whatever card you want in. I leave all three in because there's a different kind of energy that comes with each iteration of that lover's card.
I love it. I love that. because there's so many different iterations of love itself, and
Hmm.
any one of those three lovers would mean something different depending on who you're reading it for.
Exactly.
So one would read it as romantic love, while the other one would read it as platonic love, while the other
Hmm.
one might read it as a sexual attraction.
Exactly.
So different things, but all encompassing. I love it.
Hmm.
Yeah, we could go on for days
Yes.
about tarot decks, because we are both one of those in
Hmm.
people that are intrigued by other people's interpretations and artistry. And we've both bonded over
Yes.
going down rabbit holes of different decks and Kickstarters, and not making rules between our friend groups where we can't share links to Kickstarters anymore because we already have enough outstanding Kickstarters that we can't
Yes.
kickstart anymore. Yeah, we've done that.
Yeah, there was once at one point in time I had backed like 13 different Kickstarter decks in the course of a year.
Oh, wow.
It
And they
was-
trickle in. You just
they
never
do.
know when you're gonna. It's like a present for future self.
Yes,
That's kind of how I
exactly.
see them. But
It is my self-love gift to myself. Future me for those tarot decks is what I'm calling it.
well, and we do this. I do this because I like to build a relationship with different decks. Like we've
Hmm.
talked about, they have different voices. They give us
Hmm.
different things, and I do readings professionally for
Hmm.
people. I've worked with tarot for over 2 decades. I've done it professionally off and on for probably more than 1 decade.
Hmm.
It's just one of the many hyperfixations I've had that
Hmm.
really speak to my soul. And I like having these different voices because it depends on who I'm reading and
Hmm.
what kind of a reading they're looking for,
Right.
as to what kind of a deck that I reach for, and
Hmm.
what kind of a voice that we're looking to get wisdom from. And whatever's going to be the best received
Hmm.
for my clients. So with that said, I would like to obviously share that to our listeners. You know, for the foreseeable future, I am available for tarot readings. And if you were looking to connect with me over something like that, I do have a link tree. The link tree is a way that you can find all my other links to things like my email or my different social medias, or, even a pay button.
Hmm. Link in description.
Exactly. All of those things. linktr.ee
Hmm.
slash, and to find mine, it's Emotional Support Peacock. So yes, my business name is Emotional Support Peacock, and that is what I do. I like to do it with tarot, but I also have different modalities in which I offer emotional support.
Hmm.
And I know that because you and I have bonded over tarot,
Hmm.
you have a lot of tarot decks because you also have a lot of tarot projects that you do, and I would love for you to
Yes.
share those.
Yes. So I touched on this a tiny bit earlier. I have a YouTube channel where I do deck unboxings and interviews with each individual deck. So I'm slowly working my way through my own deck collection. And again, I have a backlog of decks that I have still to do because I keep getting more. Because like I said, I have a problem that I'm not afraid to admit that is a problem. But yes, I'm working my way through a
It's
bunch
not a
of
problem.
unboxings. So what I want it to be is a resource. So if you are looking for a particular type of deck, you can get a feel for what the deck is like and the voice that it has. I also am temporarily on hiatus from Twitch, but I do stream on Twitch on Wednesdays, every other Wednesday. Usually that's the second and fourth of the month, where I will do a live stream for a couple of hours and I will do live tarot readings. Um, I do charm pulls as well, which is a different topic, but again, it's all part of a different read. And between the two of them and this one, that's pretty much what I am. I have a
Show
link tree as
notes.
well in the show notes. I'll put a link tree up for me so you can find us. But yeah, if you want a reading from either Demona or myself, you can absolutely follow those links and we can schedule that and
And
what the
unless
promise would be.
you're catching the Twitch stream, I just want to be clear, we don't do free readings.
Right.
We expect to be paid a fee, an FEE. It's called Fair Energy Exchange.
Yes.
So I'm giving my energy to give you some insight and to connect with you. And I would appreciate you giving me the energy of the privilege to purchase groceries for my family,
Right. Fair
essentially.
energy exchange.
Fair
Yes.
energy exchange.
But with that, we did want to give you all at least one little
Oh,
bit
that's,
of there.
yeah.
And we wanted to do a pull of a card from one of the decks that we talked about to kind of give some insight for you about what you might need to know right now. And that's kind of the question that we look at is, as of this time, for those of you who are watching this, whether you're catching it immediately or you're catching it 5 years from its published date, what is the guidance that you need to know right now to think about? I'm going to pull from the Numinous, is the deck that I'm going to be shuffling and pulling from. And Demona, which one did you want to pull from?
I'm actually going to fully lean into this mischievous trash panda
Okay.
vibe, because, you know, there could be some questionable,
Yes.
maybe have to blur out photos of things with my other deck because there is some, you know, artistic nudity.
Yes, that's fair.
But also, like, you know, how could you say no to these fantastic raccoons?
Absolutely. So the card that I pulled when I shuffled is the Eight of Candles. Eights to me are about hard work, and candles are about fire. So creativity, energy, will, passion, and motion that's moving. And you can kind of see the way the smoke is twirling around these candles as they light and go forth. But I always want to, when I'm doing cards for new people, I will not only show the card, but I will also read what the artist or what the author interpreted and how they created that card. Because I think it's really important when we're talking about decks, because again, we have so many different types and so many different artists and so many different voices. And what one person sees may be what somebody else doesn't, or the author may have a specific interpretation that I see differently. So this is kind of what I'm looking at is emotion, energy and motion, creativity and motion that you're working towards building onto something. So that is what I'm feeling from this energy. Keep working, keep driving forward.
I know eights can sometimes be self-mastery too.
Mm-hmm. In the book itself,
Very curious as to what the author has to say.
Eight of Candles. You not only know what direction you're going in, you're going there. There's a lot of fire and passion and movement to this card.
Mm-hmm.
All of our resources and skills are directed towards creating one big flame, fueling the realization of our dreams and goals.
Ooh.
In the Victorian language of flowers, the blue hyacinths on this card represent constancy. Our combined flame is not only powerful, but steady. If we trust to our current state and direction, we will reach our goal. The fuel is there and ready to burn without flaring or ceasing in the process.
That's fantastic.
Motion, energy, driving forward.
So if you're listening to this while you're driving,
keep moving forward.
Moving. Well, I had a card fall out of the deck, which is always, you know, the one that wants to speak the loudest. And I got the Ace of Cups. And in this deck, the cups is, you know, grape soda, because of course.
Yes.
So what here you have kind of like you have a trash panda in the background, kind of floating on a pond of water and grape soda with his cute little belly up. And then in the foreground, you have a trash panda claws that have certainly shaken up their soda before they opened it. And it's opening in a fountain of purple glow of, you know, joyful, fuzzy spirit, I would say. So it's the Ace of Cups. Aces are always about new beginnings, and Cups is often about emotional journeys or feelings. But this one, just like, to me, it's like party time. You know what the feeling that it gave me is, it literally made me sit here and think about what when me as a child, you know, discovered that you could shake up a soda and create a mess with it. Yeah, and just be like, for science, right?
Right, totally. What's this gonna do?
Yeah, it's like almost the Mentos and the Coke phenomenon feeling. So the book says, I do love the books on this because it's like very short and sweet, which sometimes you don't need a lot. The other deck that I have, it can be pages worth of reading sometimes. But this is flowing intuition, spiritual energy, aligned life, emotional resonance, and bliss. So putting those keywords with your Eight of Wands, I would say that the message here for us, because we're here right now,
Hmm.
do pulling these cards, but also for anybody who this resonates for, is definitely like, the road to bliss is just ahead. Keep going,
You
you
are
know.
steady on your path. You
Yeah.
are going there. You
Don't be
just
afraid
need
to
to.
start something new. Don't be afraid to follow your intuition, because your feelings know better. Your feelings know something. They're trying to tell you something. Listen to them.
And when you combine it with your passions, when you combine it with your energy and your drive, you're going to be unstoppable.
Yes. Yeah. So that is a beautiful message. And that's just
Yeah.
a slight taste of what, how we use tarot, and what it can, how it can kind of speak to and through
Hmm.
us. And, it's fun.
It is
We love
always fun.
it.
That different
Gives you some
perspective.
gives you something to think about, if nothing else. Like sometimes I need to tell the voices in my head, no, not like I'm really like hearing voices, but like the self-talk in my
Hmm.
head, I need to give it something else to think about.
Right.
I have to distract it with something, and throw cards, readings, tend to be a really good distraction. Very
Hmm.
healthy.
And for me, I see oftentimes tarot as an alternative set of eyes on what's happening on the situation. It's that different perspective, that guidance perspective about what's happening right now and where you're going. And again, I never see it as that fortune telling, this is what's going to happen in your life. You're going to be hit by a red truck crossing the third cross street on Tuesday next. So it's no, but it's about, hey, these things are happening. What can you do? And the more you are informed, the better you can make choices.
And for me, it's only about divination if I'm actually sitting down and saying, I want to connect with this deity and get a message from them. I want
Hmm.
to connect with my guide Bast or my guide Mercury or whatever,
Hmm.
and say, I want a message through the tarot from you. That's divination.
Right.
Sure. But I also think it's spirit energy reading. So
Hmm.
not necessarily about to do with the divine, but about your body, your energy body, your spirit body that is you, and reading about the energies that are coming from you or attached to you or coming that you're going through, that sort of thing. So to me, it's very humanistic
Hmm.
and not always
Absolutely.
divination.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
All right.
thank you for letting us ramble on about
Right.
this tarot today, because obviously it's a passion of both of ours.
Right. And
Um,
please check out some of those decks. And again, I'm sure we will probably do something similar to this in the future. We've talked about tarot today, but there's a whole world of other types of decks. There's oracle decks. There's different types of other things that fall into that
Modalities.
classification,
Mhm.
modalities that fall into that class,
Runes.
divination, runes,
Yeah.
charms, lots of other things that we will go into at another time.
And things
So,
that we aren't necessarily as well
mhm.
knowledgeable about, we will do what we can to find people who are willing to come on and talk about them for us.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
giving voices to other people who have knowledge that fall under this umbrella of our queer witchy practices.
Absolutely.
So with that said, I just want to say thanks for listening to the Queer Witch Project. And if you enjoyed this topic, we would love to hear from you.
And if there is a topic you would like to know more about or an episode topic you would like to suggest, contact us at thequeerwitchproject@gmail.com or find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram with the handle at Queer Witch Project. We upload twice a month. And remember, queerness is a key to magic.
Be yourself and love rebelliously. Bye.
Bye.